is who would have the audacity to use such a charge?
Rather than risk your own people going in there and trying to shoot it out with them, it's a standard tactic in city fighting, in military operations of built-up terrain, to use explosives in this manner to kill people in the targeted room that you're going to attack.
The military's advice to the FBI was that it should focus on the leadership and capture or kill David Koresh.
It was to our benefit that we were able to prevent him from carrying out the second part of his prophecy, and that is that he intended to kill as many members of law enforcement as he could before his members were killed. It was to our benefit, and we're most fortunate that none of our people were injured.
Well, it's very obvious that the effort that was demonstrated there assured that there would be no survivors in the church records vault.
Was the Attorney General pressured by the White House to end the siege? What were the roles of Webster Hubbell and Vince Foster? Who actually made the decision to use CS gas with 22 children inside the Davidian compound? After 2 years, why is there still no clear answer?
Rangers had difficulties working with the FBI. They had a major responsibility. We had our responsibility, and they seemed not to go hand in hand. And as I recall, I testified before Congress about having a name in the White House I could have called to solicit the support of the federal authorities in our objective. And it turned out to be Vince Foster.
Mr. Hubbell, do you recall a meeting on or about the 14th or 15th of April that you attended with Vince Foster, with Mr. Nussbaum, and I guess some others, in which was really a turning point? Did you or others at that meeting recommend, or was there any discussion about the use of military force or equipment?
There was not any discussion about use of military force. There was discussion of having the military evaluate the FBI's plan.
The briefings by General Schumacher and Colonel Boykin of Delta Force gave Attorney General Janet Reno the assurances she needed to okay the FBI assault plan. Presidential counsel Vince Foster was the White House's point man for the Waco affair. 90 days later, Foster commits suicide.
He had a lot of things on his plate at the time, the firing the travel office being one, but nobody was killed in that one. What I think was really on his mind was Waco. To this day, I don't understand what he meant by the FBI lied to me.
Mrs. Foster said that her husband was depressed about a number of matters, and she ranked the Waco tragedy very high, as any of us would who are responsible for such an activity that resulted in such a tragedy.
In this FBI 302 report, Mrs. Foster indicates that her husband was troubled by the deaths of the children at Waco and believed that everything was his fault.
When you are troubled by something and you feel responsible for something, you can only feel responsible for it if you could have done something about it. Perhaps Mr. Foster felt that he could have done something about Waco, whether he tried to intervene, whether he was overruled.
The extensive use of governmental privileges against grand jury and criminal investigations has, of course, been a pattern through this administration. Most notably, the White House cited privilege in 1993 to prevent Justice Department and Park Police officials from reviewing documents in Vincent Foster's office in the days after his tragic death.
The day after Vince Foster died, I got a phone call from a fellow who used to be on my squad, who told me that they, not explaining who they were, but they had agreed that the FBI was going to come over and do a regular crime scene search of Vince Foster's office.
During the Whitewater investigation, Deborah Gorham testified she saw a Waco file in the security file cabinet next to Mr. Foster's desk. In addition, Michael Chertoff, counsel for the Senate committee, inquired about a letter by Vince Foster involving Waco. Neither was ever recovered during or after the crime scene search, and their whereabouts are still unknown. However, White House Secret Service agent Harry O'Neill testified that Maggie Williams was seen removing files from Foster's office the night of his death. Thomas Castleton, an intern and Mr. Foster's assistant, testified that he had also removed a box of files.
Just to let you know where we are in the state of the record. We have received evidence that, in fact, the box was in Mr. Foster's office. Did you understand the box you were taking up was a box of files that originated in Mr. Foster's office?
I did understand that, sir.
You heard that from Maggie Williams?
Yes.
And in fact, it was Maggie Williams, the Chief of Staff to the First Lady, that you accompanied in taking this box up to the residence, right?
That's right.
What were you told by Maggie Williams about why the box was being taken up to the residence?
I was told that the contents of the box needed to be reviewed.
Reviewed by whom?
By the First Lady.
Maggie Williams was Mrs. Clinton's chief of staff. Maggie Williams took out, you can't call it anything else but what it is. It was evidence.
One of the interesting things that happens in an investigation is you begin to get anonymous phone calls. And we, in fact, received anonymous phone calls from Justice Department managers and attorneys who believed that pressure was placed on Janet Reno by Webb Hubbell, and pressure that came from the First Lady of the United States. Now, we believed that because the military was present at Waco in some capacity, that the president may have made a decision to allow that to happen following some sort of a legal protocol where he says this is of such a serious nature they need to be involved. And we asked for those documents and asked to see National Security Council documents. And were not provided with any information that enabled us to reach a conclusion.
It's a serious allegation that the president interfered with, changed, moved up the decision. And we can't just bandy these things around unless we have some real evidence.
If Combat Applications Group was on the ground that day, actually pulling triggers, the origin of that operation would have come directly from the White House. It would have come from the president, because Combat Applications Group is, for all intents and purposes, the president's private army.
It was discussed at the meeting that the senior levels of the Clinton administration had authorized Delta to be deployed to Waco, Texas, and not just 2 or 3 people deployed there, but enough people there to get the job done.
As we come to an end, all of us are looking for anything that happened in these hearings after 8 days and nights to indicate not that that General Reno had something to do with this, but now the president. Well, after we've exhausted that bit, the only one left that I can think of is the butler. Maybe the butler did it. I am surprised you hadn't tried to subpoena the butler by now.
Our disappointment could not have been greater as professionals and as humans who care about the plight of others when the investigation was terminated by Congress.
As I count up the deaths here, 86, and then if you want to make the leap that Oklahoma City has some connection because it was done on the anniversary of Waco, that's another 160, give or take. So you're talking 246 lives, and for this Congress to try to oversee what in the hell happened and how did it happen, it just seems to be talking about the butler did it a little capricious, a little frivolous, and that's just my opinion. I yield my time to Mr. McCullough.
It's a struggle we've had. I was Attorney General when the Freedom of Information Act was passed, and the government hated the Freedom of Information Act. They hated me for pressing for it because they don't want to be questioned about what they do. They don't want to have to explain what they do. And yet, if you want to be a free society, if you want to have justice, if you want to avoid a police state, you better know what your government does. You better insist upon a right to know what your government does.
Even though you have a $20 million investigation, you don't have $20 million answers. There's nothing about Waco I feel good about. But imagine seeing small children disarticulated with bullets and debris, and having to pick up their body and their head comes off in your left hand and their body comes apart in your right hand. And, I mean, that leaves a horrible, absolutely indelible, etched in your brain memory of a tragedy.
The prosecutors during our trial tried to prove conspiracy and murder, and all 11 defendants were found by a jury to be not guilty of those two charges. And I think that, to me, is for the president and for any media or anybody in this committee to continue to refer to us as murderers, I feel that's unjust.
The government cannot be proud about what they did on February the 28th. They cannot be proud about what they did on April the 19th. And they certainly can't be happy about what this jury said to them today.
We found all of the defendants not guilty of conspiracy to commit murder and of murder. In essence, there was no way we could say that they did not use firearms.
I think the jury totally rejected the scary idea that came out in final argument that someone who would study a certain religion by virtue of the way he thinks would be guilty of a conspiracy to murder federal agents. That, I think, is one clear message that came out of this trial.
What we came to realize, too late to correct, was that we could not have found them guilty of using firearms without having found them guilty of either conspiracy to murder or murder. Those two charges were tied together.
When the judge looked at the jury's verdict, he said this finding of guilty to commission of a federal offense is inconsistent. I'll throw it out. But then he changed his mind, and when it came to sentencing, he stood the jury's verdict on its head. He said in his sentencing speech that since they were guilty of using a weapon in the commission of a federal offense, he would find that the federal offense was murder and conspiracy to commit murder. He went further on to say, you murdered not only the ATF agents, but your own co-religionist.
Federal sentencing guidelines allowed Judge Smith to choose a sentence of between 5 and 40 years. He gave all but 2 defendants the maximum sentence of 40 years in federal prison.
I knew what was going to happen. I knew what the agents were going to say, what they're going to blame myself and others in there for. But, you know, it was just something I had to go through.
I'm a school teacher, and it's, you know, a good opportunity for me to get away from the kids and forget all about them for a while and just come and relax for a while.
Paul Fatter was not at the initial February 28th shootout with the ATF, but was charged with aiding and abetting and was also given a maximum sentence of 15 years.
I don't like being in prison. You know, I don't like this situation. It's a futile experience. I don't understand it. I don't think it's making me a better person, but I believe it's all for a reason. The system had every opportunity to be fair and honest and truthful and treat us properly, and they chose not to. They chose to lie, to deceive, and to cover up, to cover their positions or their retirement or their whatever it may be. And that's something they got to deal with. They got to look at themselves in the mirror every morning and say that, hey, I made decisions that ended up costing a lot of people their lives.
I want to say that Branch Davidians are not anti-government. We're not anti-law enforcement. And I'm sorry that there are 4 agents that are dead, and there are a lot that are wounded. But we lost 85 our friends and family too, and it was unnecessary. I hear a lot of people saying that, that they hope this will never happen again, what happened to us. I believe that what happened to us was just the beginning.
Many of us had a heartfelt concern for individuals that chose a particular lifestyle that was a little bit of an off-brand lifestyle and who were cavalierly thought of as unimportant and thought of as people who simply committed suicide or simply burned themselves up. And that claim, being so widely held by everything, is also the type of thing that the investigator wants to get in under and really find out if there's another side to the story.
They were my life. They meant everything to me, and they still do. And I thank God for the hope that one day, and I hope it's soon, that I'll be able to put my arms around them and play with them again and take care of them, God willing.
We cannot put this government in the seat of God and go along with this government and say, look, you can take life anytime you well please, just like you did right before our very eyes. We had a play-by-play just like it was a football game. But you can't do this.
You know, I think the media needs to be the watchdog for the people. I mean, that's why it's the First Amendment. It's not the Second, not the 16th. It's the First Amendment. Somebody way back when thought it was very important that the media be the watchdog. I mean, in this system of checks and balances. And in this instance, it was asleep.
If we choose to learn from our mistakes, it is from admitting our errors that we come closer to understanding how we might prevent tragedies like these from happening in the future. Those who cannot admit their mistakes, well, all we can do is offer our prayers. Our government is an imperfect one, compromised of imperfect people. It can only be as good as we choose to make it. We have come too far to quit or to coast. We must continue to make it better. For we must not allow ourselves to become bitter, only better. Perhaps the greatest lesson to be learned is often the most difficult to remember until it's too late. And that is, life is very precious. It happens in moments, not seconds, not minutes, not hours, but in moments. And let us forgive, but let us never forget as we move from ashes to understanding.